Hi, my name's Kevin MacNeil and I'm a writer from the Isle of Lewis. Earlier I told a story about the MacNeils. I'm part MacNeil because I'm a half Leosoch, half Uisteach, half Baroch, but I was born and raised in Lewis, and my mother's surname was MacLean, so it's a story about the MacLean side of the family, and a little bit more not quite contemporary but 20th century, and a little bit more personal. And this story involves somebody who I'll refer to as my grandfather, though he wasn't my real grandfather, and his name was Murdo. And like many a young man during World War II, as soon as he could, he signed up with the Navy. He grew up on boats, he knew his way around the sea, and it was a natural step for him to sign up to become a member of the Navy and do his part during World War II. So after some basic training, he ended up in a city in the south coast of England, and he was he was assigned a position on a vessel under a captain who was renowned for being eccentric. And Murdo and some other young men didn't quite know how to take the captain because he was just unusual. The people who had already served under him really admired him, but the younger men who were greener and were going to sea for the first time with him were not so sure, because they were putting their lives in his hands. And his most eccentric behaviour was that he asked the men to bring barrels and barrels and barrels of green and blue paint onto the vessel before they set out to sea. And Murdo couldn't understand this. None of the men could really understand, especially because they were filling part of the hold which ought to have had artillery. They were filling it with paint, and they felt uneasy about this because they were replacing space that should have been reserved for weapons with paint. And I should say that the task they had was to protect convoys from German submarines, from U-boats. So they used to patrol off the north coast of Scotland, around Orkney, Shetland, and off the west coast right out into the Atlantic. And in the early days, after they set off for sea, they had a few skirmishes with some submarines, but nothing very dramatic and nothing overly dangerous either, until one day there was hostile enemy activity from a submarine in this one area way off the west coast of Scotland, out into the Atlantic. And my grandfather's ship, they were protecting a convoy of boats that were going on a longer journey. But this submarine was a German submarine, and it was trying to halt the convoy, and it was firing on them. So my grandfather and his friends fully expected that the captain would tell him to open fire in return, but he didn't. He started circling the boat around the area where the submarine was, and he asked all the men to start pouring the green and blue paint into the water, which they did because they didn't really feel comfortable doing this because they didn't know why they were doing it, but they couldn't go against the captain's word. He's obviously far superior to them and much more experienced, and they thought he wouldn't be a captain if he didn't know what he was doing. So they poured paint into the water, gallon after thousands of gallons of paint into the water, and to their surprise, the submarine broke surface, and they shot that submarine down with anti-aircraft guns. And the reason they did that, why they could do that, was because the paint formed a film in the view hole of the periscope, and the captain of the U-boat, told his men, look through the periscope and tell me when we break the surface of the water. But when they broke the surface of the water, there was a film of green and blue paint on the periscope. So the submarine rose and rose and rose, and when it was about 50 feet above the water, then they shot it down with the anti-aircraft guns, and apparently that's a true story.